Well, the key message is it's going to be tough to raise finance for infrastructure going forward. The private sector is obviously suffering from the credit squeeze, and we expect the public sector to start suffering from a fiscal squeeze. It's going to be difficult for them to find the investment needed. This is on top of what the OECD has identified as a widening gap anyway between the ability of the public sector to fund infrastructure investment for the future and the needs of infrastructure. In fact, there's a huge gap opening up as we go towards 2030, according to that OECD study. So it looks as though the key way of bridging that gap is to try and get more private money in alongside the public investment, certainly in surface transport. And the state still has the most important role to play, but we've got to find new money from somewhere. And in our seminar, we thought that pension funds, for instance, about 18 trillion, again an OECD figure, $18 trillion in the pension funds industry in the OECD countries. How much of that could be put into infrastructure investment, because it's a very good match for the investment needs of the pensions industry and indeed for the insurance industry, who are long-term, looking for low risk, looking for a steady yield return with good asset backing. So if you've got good regulation in all these things, you're also inflation-linked to an extent. So it's a good long-term investment, and if we could only get 5% of the pension fund investment into infrastructure rather than other areas of equities or bonds, that would be $1 trillion to start with. So we discussed that a bit, and about the need to get the PPP right, and to prioritise which projects we need to invest in transport, and to increase the expertise and the best models of PPP to adopt. And there's now a growing body of international evidence on that that's being pulled together by the OECD in particular, which I think will be very valuable. Well, at the moment, a lot of governments have obviously got stimulus packages going, and they're looking for what they call shovel-ready projects, where they can start digging now to create jobs and protect us against the economic downturn. But of course, if you look at transport, it usually takes about 10 years for a reasonably large project to go from conception to completion. So I think with transport, you've really just got to keep your nerve and drive forward, knowing where the priorities lie, whether it's in congestion bottlenecks, or whether it's in international trade that we've got to start analysing now. So it's a matter of picking the right projects and making sure you've got the analytical tools in place so that governments make the decision on adding value through involvement of the private sector in PPPs, for instance, and that we get a better dialogue between as it were, the public sector and the politicians, and the private sector and the money that they probably need to bridge the growing infrastructure gap. And I think therefore it has to be the case that private money is seen as something that's additional, not a replacement for, and it's additional because it offers value for money, that the private sector can run the business more efficiently. If it can't, then don't waste public money going down that route, the PPP route. But the evidence seems to be growing as that PPP and the involvement of the private sector can be positive. Well, it's what might be suggested that would help the public sector get investment from the private sector is easy to say and hard to achieve, because what you really want are systems of secure regulation, secure and predictable legal systems. You want the freedom from political risk. And one of the dangers of the present situation is that because of the risks elsewhere, private capital will withdraw back to areas where it's more comfortable in Western Europe, in North America, in Australia, and so on. And that might be to the detriment of the developing countries. So that's one of the considerations there. So people know what's needed and what they should be trying to do, but it's difficult to achieve, and particularly in circumstances where you might have a credit crunch, which is causing a lot of political tensions, over the next few years.